Brazil is one of the largest agricultural producers in the world, playing a crucial role in the global food supply. The country is a leading exporter of coffee, soybeans, sugar, and beef, significantly contributing to the national economy and providing livelihoods for millions. In 2020, agriculture accounted for approximately 5% of Brazil's GDP, and the sector is vital for both domestic consumption and international trade. However, Brazil's agricultural sector is now facing significant challenges that threaten its sustainability and future viability. These include rampant deforestation, particularly in the Amazon rainforest, unsustainable farming practices, government policies favoring expansion over sustainability, and the impacts of climate change. Understanding these issues is essential for grasping how Brazil, despite its agricultural prowess, is jeopardizing its natural resources and, consequently, its food security. Deforestation refers to the large-scale removal of trees from forested areas, often resulting in damage to the quality of the land. In the Amazon rainforest, the world's largest tropical rainforest, deforestation has reached alarming levels. According to data from the Brazilian National Institute for Space Research, deforestation rates in the Amazon have increased by 22% from 2019 to 2020, with over 11,000 square kilometers of forest lost in a single year. This deforestation has profound implications for biodiversity, as the Amazon is home to around 10% of all known species on Earth. This destruction of this habitat not only threatens countless plant and animal species, but also disrupts ecological balance and contributes to climate change. The connection between deforestation and agricultural expansion is particularly significant. Much of the deforestation is driven by the need for land to raise cattle and cultivate soybeans. Brazil is the world's largest exporter of beef and the second largest producer of soy, with vast swaths of the Amazon being cleared to accommodate livestock and monoculture soybean farms. This agricultural expansion is often prioritized over environmental conservation, leading to a cycle of ecological degradation. For example, a report by Greenpeace indicated that around 70% of deforested areas in the Amazon were transformed into pastures for cattle ranching. This not only exacerbates carbon emissions, but also contributes to soil erosion, making the land less productive over time. As the agricultural sector continues to expand into these vital ecosystems, the implications for Brazil's environment and its ability to maintain sustainable food production become increasingly dire. Brazil's agricultural sector has increasingly relied on unsustainable farming practices, primarily monoculture and excessive pesticide use, which have far-reaching consequences for the environment and food security. Monoculture, the practice of growing a single crop over large areas, is particularly prevalent in Brazil's soybean and sugarcane industries. While this method can initially boost productivity, it significantly diminishes biodiversity and makes crops more susceptible to pests and diseases. For instance, Brazil is the world's largest producer of genetically modified soybeans, with approximately 90% of its soybean crop being GM varieties designed for herbicide resistance. This reliance on a single crop type not only leads to diminished genetic diversity, but also increases vulnerability to market fluctuations and pest outbreaks. The excessive use of pesticides in Brazilian agriculture compounds these issues. The country is one of the largest consumers of pesticides globally, with around 400 tons used annually, much of which is linked to soybean cultivation. While pesticides can help control pests and increase yields, their overuse poses serious risks to soil health, water quality, and human health. Studies have also shown that runoff from agriculture fields can lead to contamination of rivers and lakes, posing threats to aquatic ecosystems and local communities. For example, in 2019, a study found that the use of pesticides in Brazilian farming significantly increased the levels of toxic substances in water sources, which directly impacted the health of surrounding populations. The consequences of these practices extend beyond environmental effects. They also lead to soil degradation and loss of vital nutrients. Monoculture depletes the soil of essential nutrients over time, as the same crop extracts specific minerals repeatedly without allowing the land to recover. According to research published in the journal Nature Sustainability, nearly 40% of Brazil's agricultural land is already showing signs of soil degradation, with critical nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus declining rapidly. The degradation is exacerbated by practices like tillage, which disrupts soil structure and reduces its ability to retain moisture and nutrients. One notable case study illustrating the decline in soil health is the experience of the Brazilian Cerrado, a vast tropical savanna that has seen extensive agricultural development. A report by the World Wildlife Fund, or WWF, highlighted that the conversion of Cerrado ecosystems into croplands, particularly for soybean production, has led to significant reductions in soil fertility and increased erosion. Farmers in this region are now facing challenges in sustainable crop yields, leading to a cycle of reliance on chemical fertilizers to compensate for nutrient loss, which further contributes to environmental degradation. Government policies in Brazil have often prioritized agricultural expansion at the expense of sustainability, driven by economic pressures to boost exports and profits. Over the past few decades, Brazil has positioned itself as a global agricultural powerhouse, particularly in the production of soybeans and beef. This strategic focus has led to policies that favor land conversion and intensive farming practices. For example, the Brazilian government's Growth Acceleration Program encourages investment in agriculture by simplifying regulations and providing financial initiatives for agribusiness. Such policies often overlook the long-term environmental impacts, resulting in accelerated deforestation and soil degradation. Economic pressures play a significant role in driving these harmful practices. Brazil's agricultural sector is highly export-oriented, with commodities like soybeans and beef making up a substantial portion of the country's export earnings. In 2020, agricultural exports accounted for nearly 30% of Brazil's total export revenue. This focus on profit can lead farmers to prioritize short-term gains over sustainable practices, resulting in practices like monoculture and excessive pesticide use. For instance, during the global soy boom, many farmers were incentivized to clear vast areas of the Amazon for soybean cultivation, often ignoring the associated environmental consequences. Recent legislation has exacerbated these issues, with certain policies actively undermining environmental protections. In 2021, changes to Brazil's forest code, which governs land use in the Amazon, were criticized for allowing increased agricultural development in previously protected areas. This legislative shift has led to a surge in land grabbing and illegal deforestation, as farmers exploit loopholes to expand their operations. Additionally, the weakening of regulatory enforcement has made it easier for agribusiness to ensure its unsustainable practices without facing significant penalties. As a result, Brazil's agricultural expansion continues to compromise its ecological integrity, highlighting the urgent need for policies that balance economic growth with environmental sustainability. Climate change is having a profound impact on Brazilian agriculture, manifesting in more frequent and severe weather events such as droughts and floods. These changes threaten crop yields and food security across the country. For instance, Brazil has experienced increased variability in rainfall patterns, with some regions facing prolonged droughts while others suffer from intense flooding. A notable example is the drought that affected the Northeast region in 2021, where reduced rainfall severely impacted local farmers' ability to grow staple crops such as corn and beans. The Brazilian Agricultural Resource Corporation reported that such climatic fluctuations could reduce overall agricultural productivity by as much as 25% by 2050 if current trends continue. Moreover, there exists a feedback loop wherein agriculture itself contributes to climate change, primarily through greenhouse gas emissions. Brazil is the largest emitter of carbon dioxide and methane, largely due to the deforestation for agricultural expansion and emissions from livestock. The livestock sector alone contributes approximately 25% of the country's total greenhouse gas emissions. As forests are cleared and burned to create pasture land, significant amounts of carbon stored in trees are released into the atmosphere, exacerbating global warming. Additionally, the intensive use of fertilizers and crop productions lead to nitrous oxide emissions, another potent greenhouse gas. Specific regions are feeling the brunt of these impacts, with crops such as soybeans, sugarcane, and coffee particularly vulnerable. For example, the southern region of Brazil has faced both drought and frost, affecting coffee production, which relies on stable climatic conditions. Farmers are increasingly reporting crop failures and reduced yields, which can lead to economic instability for those dependent on agriculture for their livelihoods. The situation underscores the urgent need for adaptive measures in Brazilian agriculture, including sustainable practices and climate-resilient crop varieties, to mitigate the adverse effects of climate change and ensure food security in the future. The expansion of agriculture in Brazil has had devastating impacts on indigenous lands and communities. As large swaths of the Amazon rainforest are cleared for cattle ranching and soybean production, indigenous peoples find their ancestral territories encroached upon, their livelihoods threatened. The Brazilian government policies, which often prioritize agribusiness over indigenous rights, exacerbate this situation. According to the indigenous rights organization Survival International, nearly 6% of Brazil's indigenous territories are under threat from deforestation and agricultural expansion. This encroachment not only disrupts traditional ways of life, but also undermines cultural identities that are deeply intertwined with the land. One poignant example is the struggle of the Guarani Kawai people in the state of Mato Grosso do Sul. Their territory has been increasingly invaded by agribusinesses, leading to significant land disputes. Reports have emerged of violence against indigenous individuals who resist land grabs and deforestation efforts. The Guarani Kawai have faced severe social and economic challenges as a result, including forced displacement, loss of access to traditional food sources, and heightened poverty levels. Activists have documented cases where these communities are left with little recourse, facing both legal and physical threats when trying to reclaim their land. Resistance movements among indigenous communities have gained momentum as awareness of the plight increases. Organizations such as the Articulation of Indigenous Peoples of Brazil have mobilized to advocate for the protection of indigenous rights and the preservation of their lands. Protests, legal battles, and international advocacy have become critical tools for these communities. For example, in 2021, the Guarani Kauai led protests to draw attention to their land rights and the environmental impacts of agricultural expansion. Their efforts have received support from both domestic and international human rights organizations, highlighting the interconnectedness of environmental and social justice. Addressing the challenges facing Brazil's agricultural sector requires a shift towards sustainable farming practices and regenerative agriculture. Sustainable farming focuses on techniques that enhance productivity while minimizing environmental impact, such as crop rotation, agroforestry, and organic farming. Regenerative agriculture goes a step further, aiming to restore and enhance soil health, biodiversity, and ecosystem resilience. For instance, practices promoting agroecology have been shown to increase yields by improving soil quality and reducing reliance on chemical inputs. A study by Embrapa found that farms adopting agroecological practices can increase their productivity by 30% while reducing greenhouse gas emissions.